Hi there. This is based on Stefan Hollier's Journey of the Soul, Gnostic Mythic Patterns. And fantastic video, what can you say? In it, he describes in some detail the bottommost illustration here, which basically, the soul comes from the supernal world, and it goes down into the lower worlds and then rises back up again, the soul going home to the supernal worlds from whence it came. And I've already described, how this is where we're coming from eternity, from beyond space and time, and then going into space and time, a sort of bubble shape here, and going back to eternity. And then, of course, I already described the fact that there is an alternate eternity of the realms of the demiurge, and stick by that model. So that this bubble that's going down into the lower worlds and coming back up into the higher worlds crosses over the demiurge, and the demiurge's infinite realm, and the soul becomes trapped, as it were. Now, this cosmology is a bit different from classical Gnosticism, which basically has the idea of the demiurge almost being in a sort of chain of events. He's a link in the chain, or he's the sort of last link of the chain, as it were. And things get created, and the Sophia descends, and the demiurge is the sort of last in the link of creation, as it were. But interestingly enough, in one of the Gnostic texts, it talks about the demiurge becoming lord of what's already there. It seems to imply that there's already chaos and death and hell present, and these demigods, these intelligences, become become lord over the things that already exist. So that's an interesting sort of detail of cosmology. That it could be that the realms of the demiurge, the hells and whatnot, are already there, and it's almost like the demiurge is created to lord it over them. So that's an interesting kind of. It happens simultaneously. Anyway, I've already been in some detail over this. The journey soul down into the lower worlds and back up again. This would seem to me to be the actual journey, sort of right hand path, as it were, because you do get help, and you do have to have faith. So that these are characteristics of the right hand path. But this rising figure here, this is. This represents the Western magical tradition, or left-hand path, and basically, and I refer to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in particular with this, because they actually were a real existent order for about a couple of decades, and they did initiate people. So what happened is that you went through stages of initiation, and throughout the stages of initiation, you encountered various shadow creatures along the way, which would give you a hard time in real life. So a lot of things happened in real life, but you'd overcome them, and you get to the Depths Exemptus grade, which corresponds to Hesed in the Kabbalah, which is the Sephirot number 4, and the number 4 is below number 3, but there's a huge abyss between 4 and 3. And what happens is you get to the top of your game, as it were, and you think you're sitting pretty, and then suddenly everything is taken away from you, and you become what they call a babe of the abyss, which means that everything that you knew previously does not avail you at all. All your knowledge escapes you, and you literally collapse. I suppose you enter the dark night of the soul. you become a babe of the abyss, and it talks about, you become burnt up, and you become a pile of dust, and then four angels come and collect up your dust, your remains, and take them up, to the supernal, up to the level of Bina, which is beyond the abyss. So, but the process is one of total collapse. So you go up, you sort of rise up, and then you collapse down. And this happens in the realms of Demiurge, of course. That initiation happens within this particular world of the Demiurge. So that's an interesting kind of thing to contemplate as well, and could be spelled out in more detail for another lecture, I suppose, really. But the biggest thing I wanted to look at today was the following the lecture by Stefan. Was the fact that he talked about the revealing of the elements. Well, he talked about, first of all, becoming being a baby and crawling around and becoming aware of physical sensation. And as he described the process of maturation from baby to adulthood, I had in mind this pentagram, and I had in mind the four elements. So here the baby, here you start off life becoming aware of physical sensation, crudely at first, but becoming more sophisticated. And then you develop your emotions, you develop your emotional self, and things leave an emotional impression on you. In fact, you're all emotion really at a particular age. And then you go to school, and they teach you how to be rational. You develop discursive thought. You develop your own ideas, your own thinking, and you have also thinking imposed upon you by the school system, of course, which is another lecture again. But as Stefan says, most people stop there. Some people stop at the emotional level, and some people stop at only the cognitive level. But there is another level. Well, it's not exactly a level, because that would imply hierarchy. Animals have this. They have a very well developed intuition, and this intuition side of the human character is not well developed in so-called civilized circles, but it is there, lying dormant in most people. But you can, as a result of following the Western magical tradition, release the intuitive level, which is what the Golden Dawn was all about. Releasing the intuitive level until you get to this bit here, the sort of top bit here, and then of course you're going to crash out. And then as he was talking about this, Stefan was talking about this, I thought, well, the next step is to go up to spirit and then go back down to the physical level. And I thought, this is a bit strange. What does this pattern actually mean? What does it indicate? And I think it indicates the fact that what I've discussed before about if you look at an object, if you look at the world, you come to a realization actually that the world, is a place of imprisonment for the soul. And this is a depressing view. So you're looking from the soul's point of view, the anguish of the soul, which is this white space here. And you're looking into the dark of matter, matter being evil, matter being imprisoned in a prison, an element of restriction for your spiritual growth, resistance to your spiritual growth. And you sort of go into a dark night of the soul. But then, as I said before, when you come up here and you reverse the colours, suddenly, although you're in the dark night of the soul, you're in the sort of matter is evil kind of perception. Suddenly you see that in fact matter or objects are filled with the light of Keter in actual fact. So you're basically looking at life through a telescope at one end and through a microscope in the other. So so basically it's almost like you're looking at so you're looking at the same object, but you're looking at it with a different perspective. So if we can imagine, you started off looking at the world from this perspective, as you gained emotionality and cognition, and sensual perception. And then when you get to the intuitive level and go beyond the intuitive level, you go back to the same object, you go back to the world, and you're here observing a completely different world, a completely different object. And it's so that's kind of a simplistic sort of version of it. But you also developed what I call a disinterested attitude, which is not indifferent. You're not indifferent to the world and to suffering. You do develop kindness and you do develop compassion, but you're disinterested, so you're kind of impartial. You're not letting the world affect you. It's like you're looking at it objectively from this point here, which is the point of where you develop your intuition to such a degree. So you go up from fire all the way up through spirit and go back down to earth, and then it's like a different world. And that, I would say, is one aspect of salvation, where the whole world, changes. It's the same world, but you look at it in a different way. And sort of super cognitive behavior therapy happens in an instant, and you say, and you're initiated into seeing the world differently. So that's one aspect of salvation. And we've already looked, of course, at the homecoming, which is when the soul goes back to the supernal worlds, and to the initiatory level, where you go up to a height of initiation, and then you suddenly lose everything. You sort of collapse and go back down to nothing again, or at least you think you have, but in fact you haven't. You've just changed your perception of nothing, which is perhaps what happens. So at the same time, as you're going back to home, as the soul's going home, you also come to the realization that zero is not zero, but in fact infinity. And you realize this through the development of your intuition, which is part of the process of the Western magical tradition. When you get to the point, when you get to the peak here of intuition, and then you suddenly lose everything, and then you have the realization that you haven't lost anything at all. It's not gone anywhere. In fact, you've just changed your perception of zero, and suddenly it becomes infinity. So these three kind of three elements come together to create one massive experience of salvation. Even within the darkness of the realms of the demiurge. Salvation in terms of initiation, where you become you go through the abyss and to the other side, and an experience of salvation in the here and now. With regard to seeing the world in a different way and seeing yourself in a different way. So all these things happen simultaneously at some point. And in actual fact, this is a model which is not necessarily metaphysical, because you don't actually have to believe in a soul after death or even in a god. This is a sort of deep psychological event, or three events that come together, and they come together within your own human consciousness. So, you don't have to be a believer in God. You could be an agnostic, I suppose, or even an atheist. And then you could see salvation in terms of a deep psychological realization, and you go into this kind of disinterested state, which is not the same as indifferent, because you're not indifferent. You're disinterested. It means you're impartial. You have no axe to grind anymore, as far as the world is concerned. It doesn't affect you. Things happen, and there are results and effects, but they don't affect you in any way, because they don't take anything from you like they used to. Because you used to feel that if there was an effect or a result or a situation arising, it would somehow take from your emotions or take from your emotional resources. But now, because you've reached this disinterested state, it no longer does that. So I suppose the sort of Buddhist kind of idea of developing the non-reactive mind. You're not reacting to things anymore, You're just allowing everything, all events, to slide over you like water over a duck's body, and so this is my idea of salvation, but it's only a partial idea of salvation, and it actually, because it could have no metaphysical element to it, it might be quite useful for people that really can't believe in God on an intellectual way, because it just doesn't, they say, well, there's no evidence for God and there's no ontological argument for God, and yet you could still partake of this kind of this idea of salvation, and which kind of could be quite useful for modern times, actually, because otherwise a lot of people who don't believe in metaphysics are going to be completely left behind, left out of this process, which is a great process, and which leads to deep healing and deep psychological realization. So I thought I'd leave it there, but of course, a lot of people will say, "Well, you do need to have metaphysics. You need to have the metaphysical element to understanding the soul's journey. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense." But not necessarily, because as I've shown, I hope that that the various things can come together on a psychological level, at least. But whether things have a metaphysical basis, well, that really is a subject for another discussion, really, in a way. And I meant to kind of put the metaphysical case with these three models of salvation, and I ended up thinking to myself, well, a person that doesn't believe in God or anything could actually still benefit from religion. It would have to be a sort of humanist-based religion, but they still actually could benefit, and that would be a good thing, rather than leaving people out in the cold because they can't accept the existence of God on a metaphysical level. I suppose what I'm really saying is that Buddhism is a good philosophy to develop for one's own personal life and existential unfoldment, as it were. But Gnosticism does have a metaphysical basis. So all these things are happening actually on this earth and above, and as above, so below as well. Anyway, I hope it's a bit of a kind of thought experiment. This a bit rambling, and I'd have to write it all down, I think, to actually communicate it in a bit more of a sensible way, really. Anyway, that was just my reaction to Stefan Hollier's lecture on the soul's journey. I wanted to expand on it. I wanted to make it relevant to people that can't believe in God for whatever reason, as well as trying to expand an understanding of the metaphysics behind salvation.